Welcome back to another episode of WagMe TV. Thrilled to be back today with the absolute homies. We got the Doctor, Doc Mata. We got the All-American, Ev Smith. And we got the NFT Lord himself, Alex Garcia. We're super excited to be back here this week. We always try to keep everyone posted on the biggest market-moving news. And this week, we've heard a ton of chatter around Mount Gox. And so, today what we're going to do is we're going to lay it all out for you. We're going to give you everything you need to know on the Mount Gox situation and its potential implications in the Bitcoin market. Before we jump into it, just make sure to like, comment, and subscribe down below. We love all you guys listening, and we really appreciate it. So, Mount Gox, it's hard to really get into it without bringing up old girlfriends, but you kind of hate when those things start popping back up, and it seems like Mount Gox is kind of Bitcoin's old girlfriend. So we're going to throw it over to Evan here for a little blast from the past. Take us back to 2014 for a little history lesson here, Ev.
Yes, sir. Well, to start this, we're going to have to rewind back to the year 2014. The San Francisco Giants just won the World Series. Maps by Maroon 5 was topping the Billboard 100, and Bitcoin was down 55% year over year. So definitely a tough year for Bitcoin. But what helped cause this? Well, it's this little old exchange called Mount Gox. But in 2014, this wasn't really little. Mount Gox was handling over 70% of all Bitcoin transactions worldwide. Then all of a sudden, it abruptly ceased operations. You would go to the homepage, it would just show a blank screen. And its involvement in the lost theft of hundreds of thousands of Bitcoins were worth hundreds of millions in US dollars. So let's dive in real quick. So on February 7th, 2014, Mount Gox suspended all trading. And this was when we saw that website go to a blank page. Fast forward to 2.5 weeks, and on February 24th, a leaked document claimed that the company was insolvent and said it had lost almost 750,000 of its customers' Bitcoins and around 100,000 of its own Bitcoins, totaling in close to 7% of all Bitcoins that existed then. In March 20th, 2014, Mount Gox reported on its website that it had found 200,000 Bitcoin. So that took the total from 850,000 Bitcoins to 650,000 Bitcoins. Still a lot, but at least they were moving in the right direction. But the problem was that Bitcoin wasn't moving in the right direction. During this period, these Mount Gox problems, the value of Bitcoin declined by 36%. So why are we bringing this up right now? Well, fast forward to today, 2022, the creditors are now having their chance to be paid back somewhat of the money that they gave to Mount Gox. And why has it taken it 8 years? Well, there was a lawsuit with Coin Labs that had to be finalized that took 8 years. And now the creditors, the people who had deposited money into Mount Gox, are able to be paid back in a couple different ways. So the first way that they had an option was an early partial lump sum payment that could have happened years ago. While the second was that they wanted to wait until the end of the civil rehabilitation in the Japanese courts. So these Japanese courts gave these creditors two options. The people that had deposited their Bitcoin, they gave them two options. One, they could get their currency in native currency, which would be a combination of Bitcoin, Bitcoin Cash, and yen. Or the second option is the trustees, the representatives on the Mount Gox side of this court case, could liquidate the entirety of the Bitcoin and turn it into cash. And why is this important? Well, this is 141,000 Bitcoins that would be liquidated, assuming that the worst case scenario would happen where all Bitcoins would be liquidated on the same day. But, forwarding the clock to 2022, the year that we're in, this only makes up 8.8% of the average daily trade volume of Bitcoin. So the big question is, how is this going to affect Bitcoin's price? Sia, what are your thoughts on the possible price action?
Yeah, great breakdown to give us just a little bit of background on what's going on. So I love the way that you ended that too, talking about 140,000 Bitcoin coming off the market in terms of what the worst case scenario could be, and kind of looking at something that is not quite as bad as 140,000 Bitcoin, but could be in terms of the amount that was actually sold off. But Luna back here in May, when Luna went underwater and all the protocols lost all that Terra Luna when it basically depegged.
Right.
We saw I think it was like 80,000 Bitcoin or maybe 100,000 Bitcoin that came off the market there and was instantly liquidated, essentially. And so, seeing the effect on that price action, obviously gives us an idea of what could potentially happen. But obviously, based on what you were saying, that could be, the worst case that we'd see.
Yeah, that's an interesting one. And I love that you bring up kind of LFG and everything that happened there. It was interesting. I feel like there was a lot of cascading liquidation. So we say it was 80,000 Bitcoin, I believe, right, with the whole Luna piece. But there was also Three Arrows Capital. They were forced to sell billions worth of assets. There were the miners that had to dump. And then there's just the general sentiment in the market, right? So there's just a huge price hit happening at that point. So I feel like we don't quite know exactly how many Bitcoin were probably pulled off the market from all of those potential pieces. And it's something that we'll get into here is, with this group, is this a group that's kind of like your classic hodlers? They were in it from the beginning and they're going to keep that? Or are there going to be people who are going to be selling? Like, what are the chances that all of the 140,000 Bitcoin get dumped on the market? Things like that, right? So ton of stuff to keep in mind when it comes to this, but definitely really important to keep aware of. And Evan, I appreciate the background there. That was awesome.
Yeah, Armada, I think you bring up a really good point, and something that's definitely important to look at is like the question of who are these people, right, that are getting back their Bitcoin. They're very clearly early adopters, right? They're back in 2014 already investing in Bitcoin, definitely early adopters within the space. And so you kind of get into this little bit of a dichotomy where it's like you have a lot of early adopters who obviously have seen an absolutely parabolic run up multiple times since 2014. At the same time, you have a bunch of people who are sitting on probably 80 to 200 X's, right? And so I think logically speaking, most people in those shoes are probably going to take some profit. That being said, it's hard to imagine that, that real bear case situation of all 140,000 being instantly sold into the market, right? You definitely have a lot of early crypto adopters, people who really believe in the space. And so, taking some profit, as we all know, is prudent and expected. But at the same time, I would be very shocked to see a lot of these people severely dump their entire bag, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, I think that's the biggest thing we've seen in the Twitter sphere, right? This is going to be the biggest black swan in Bitcoin history. I'm not sure if it's going to be quite that. I think there's a lot that's going to come into play here, especially as we've kind of seen the macro take a little bit of a risk off turn here. It would be interesting, and we don't quite know exactly the date where all these are being released out to the creditors, right? As Evan mentioned, on July 6th was when they got that note, and they just said over the coming weeks, those will be released out. So how they're released out, I'm not sure if we know that. When they'll be released out, we're not sure if we know that. I was even speculating, I believe it was last Thursday, really late, we saw a nice little drop in Bitcoin, and I was thinking maybe that was partially some of the Mt. Gox release. So I think there's a lot to be wary of, but I think a lot of the Twitter sphere really has been really honing in on this black swan piece, and I'm really hoping that it's not to that extent. Sorry to cut you off, Alex.
No, you're totally fine. I mean, I think that it's a really good point to say that it's already been, essentially released at least to some extent, over the last, let's call it, month and a half, right? So, I mean, given how strong Bitcoin's been in that time, it's pretty much done exactly what we expected. If it's going to come off of the 200-week moving average and kind of just, obviously dive there. And, we actually were still able to keep the former resistance as support. So it's essentially doing what you'd want it to do if you wanted the chart to stay bullish and not come back down to 19, 20K, right? So it's really, really interesting to see what we're going to do, between now and that next Fed meeting over here. So if there was going to be some sort of sell-off to Mount Gox, I mean, as of now, I don't think the impact has actually been too bad, which is good to see.
100%. And I think, that kind of just brings us to what are the implications here? What are our key takeaways, and kind of what can you guys do as listeners to kind of prepare, right? From our perspective, we really think that given the fact that, it's only 8 or 9% of daily traded volume that's coming into the market in like the worst case scenario, right? We already know that that's not that severe. On top of that, the risk that all those people actually do liquidate their entire bag is probably pretty low, given the fact that they're early adopters and everything, right? So overall, when you just take the Mount Gox, scenario in isolation, we think over here that, it's not going to be that much of a risk, right, to Bitcoin price as a whole. That being said, you take it and you always have to evaluate these things in kind of a holistic perspective. And if you look at what's going on in the broader economy, right, if we do continue to see risk-off movements in risk assets, if we do continue to, see a little bit of turbulence in the broader financial markets, and then on top of this, you have, this added selling pressure of a lot of Bitcoin coming out of the market, mixed with a potential, for the potential that we are pretty much at that core resistance level of 20K. All of a sudden, if you combine all those things into one, you could see some bearish potential implications in that scenario. So that's all to say, we don't think it's a huge risk at the moment, but at the same time, stay prudent, and it's always the things that you don't see that could get you. So make sure you're kind of being aware of that. Anything else to add, fellas?
Not specifically. I think you lay out an incredible point there, so I'm right. By itself, it's probably not going to be too large of an impact. But if you add in a lot of these other factors, that's when it could get a little bit scary. So that's why we're here, chat through all this, kind of share what we're seeing in the market. And so hopefully it was helpful.
All right, boys. Well, to the listeners, make sure to like, comment, and subscribe down below if you found this useful. And we'll see you next time here on WagMe TV.
WagMe.